It was, for me, it was unusual. But there were all these white people, busy working, people breaking down walls, people painting, people all busy working. And of course, I had gone there to volunteer to make tea for them. And very slowly, when you come into that space where people have already owned it, and you have to like adjust your mind to what's going on in that space. You don't know these people, they're still nameless to you, but everybody's just working. And in a sense, when I went there, I didn't go in as someone who was going to be permanently a part of it. I went there, I didn't want to be there, in fact. It's my white friend who pulled me there to go and make tea. Because she was excited, the theater was opening at the doorstep. I was a poet, she was a poet. So she dragged me there to go and make tea for them for nothing. And I told her, listen, when I work, I want to get paid. You're white, you've got money, you can work for free. And she said, come on, Dicklers, I'm not going to take that nonsense from you. And she pulled me into this space. So you can imagine the impact of it on me. Because there were these people working, I didn't know anybody. But everybody seemed to be so like involved in that part of the space that they were working on that you couldn't even go over. I didn't feel if I went over and just stood and watched the person working, it was as if I would be intruding. But you must remember, I had no idea what a theater looked like. I came from the township. There was a warehouse. I had no idea what it was going to look like until the main theater was standing. And as I stood there, I felt, wow. There was just this black room with these black plastic, gray plastic chairs in a circular space and on the floor. And they kept on telling me, that's the stage. And to me, it didn't connect because the stage here in the township is a platform. So you can imagine the unlearning that had to happen and the learning. And I had to be very patient with myself because I was seeing things that I had not seen before, close up. I never walked away from the space really. So I stayed there. And some of the very first shows I saw were mostly fugue plays, And I was sitting in the front row and people were playing on the floor just 2 feet away from me. That's how realistic it was. I had to watch a statement after an arrest, after an act of immorality, right 2 feet away from me. And that was my reality of apartheid, even if it was happening between a white woman and a colored woman. But that was my reality. And I sat there, and as I told Percy Sif, I hated him for arresting that couple there, those two people. So for me, there was that impact of reality, that everything to me was real. It was happening for real. And to me, the space became my university because I never went to university. I was seeing plays from all over the world, written by writers I'd never heard of, from all over the world. And I could relate to those plays. Somehow, I related to them. And so I had this amazing opportunity that I think nobody in this township ever had, which was a great fortune for me, that every evening I would usher people in, show them their seats, but as soon as everybody was sitting and those lights went down, I became part of that audience every night. I'm very passionate about the English language. And I think that was helped along because I went to a Catholic boarding school in Rustenburg, and I was taught by Irish nuns from Birmingham. And in my classroom, every classroom in that school had a bookshelf with 40 books. So I read all the English classics that were written for young English children. I read Charles Dickens, I read Treasure Island. I stole books from the classroom shelves and I took them into my room in the dormitory and I read them with a torch under my blankets. They would be allowed. I could have found them at the local library. Okay, but I was in a situation where I was in a boarding school. I never had a bookshelf right through my primary school education. Then I got to this boarding school and I was taught by Irish nuns. They brought books from England. And there was no television, there was radio. So you could always imagine, you know. And that's the thing that I think the kids of today are missing, is that ability not to see the picture, but to use your imagination by reading or by hearing the voices, you know, of the radio play. Yes, we had set works that were read, that were prescribed by the education system. But we had a library. But unfortunately, the library was burnt down in 1960 after those people were killed in Sharpeville. And so we never had a library in this township after that. So you can imagine the hunger for me to read. There is so much technology out there, you know. You can buy a Kindle and read books. You can, you know, get books off the internet, that kind of thing. But I think the thing that makes a lot of the young people lazy is television. You know, in the Xhosa language, if I translate it into English, television is like cooked food. You know, you just take it and eat it. You're not teaching them to fish, it's there, you know. That's why they won't read. They can watch the movie. They can go and buy a DVD. So I work in schools and I help a lot of grade 12s with their English drama set works. So some of what I'm doing is theatre in education, because they will get a dramatic book to read, a play to read, but they will never read it outside of the classroom. And sometimes the teacher doesn't have enough information about that particular subject. Okay, so this year they've been reading Nothing But the Truth. This is the 6th year. It's written by John Carney. I've done it 5 times, okay, that play for the grade 12s. And because I have a background in protest theatre, in theatre of the struggle, I am able to break that book down so that when the learners leave, nobody has a question. Because the first thing that they do not know is what is black theatre, okay? And theatre is theatre. We just put the word black because it speaks particularly about our issues, which were political and will always be political issues. And then I will say to them, we broke down black theatre into 3 genres, okay? When I first came into theatre in the 70s, we were doing protest theatre. And the example of protest theatre is Sizwe is Dead. And what was the essence of the play? It was the passbook, okay? How that government made every black person carry a passbook to control our movements, to control where we work, to control where we went to school. And how did they do that? Very simply, inside each passbook there was a code. If you were born in the Western Cape, your code could be 10.1. If you were born in Port Elizabeth, your code could be 10.2. So if you decide to leave Cape Town to go to Port Elizabeth to look for work, that's what the employer is told by the government to look for. Look for the code. If a policeman stops you on the street and says, please, I want to see your passbook, he looks for the code. And the kids laughed at the simplicity of how the government managed to control so many people, okay? So I said there was protest theatre. But then when we protested, we made the government angry, and the government reacted and suppressed us even more. So protest theatre was mild. In the 1980s, 1985, 1986, South Africa was burning. We had the necklacing, which is how the comrades, the freedom fighters, could control people from giving the police information about what they were doing. So South Africa was burning. There was the tires, the necklacing. There was also a state of emergency. You couldn't leave your house after 9 p.m. The police had the right to shoot you straight away without asking questions. So you can imagine, in 1985, the government pulls its mask off. So what do? As theatre practitioners, we had to pull our masks off. And we broke the fourth wall of theatre. We stopped doing plays for the audience. We performed plays to the audience. If you saw a white face in the audience and there was a passage in the play that related to racism or the suppression of people, you would choose that white person and you would talk directly to them about what their government was doing. And that was the theatre of the struggle. In the first South African, there is this young man whose mother was an African and his father was a German, and he looked white physically. And he grew up in Langa, lived in Langa, went to school in Langa, was circumcised in the African tradition. But then when the Group Areas Act started and became a law, the government kicked out all the colored people who were living in the township of Langa, and he was one of them. So they made him carry a colored ID. And this was the whole point of the play. Was here was a man who had grown up in a culture and had made it his culture. And they wouldn't allow him to stay with the people that he loved, even if it meant that he had to carry a passbook. That man in the audience got upset. She opens up her passbook because she has been stopped by a policeman. And she is talking to the policeman about her passbook. And at that point, when the policeman starts asking her about the passbook, she starts getting upset. And then she switches from talking to the policeman, and now she's talking to the audience about how this passbook has become a chain around black people's necks. White people can go wherever they want, and nobody and nothing controls their movements. But we have to be controlled by this damn passbook. He yelled, "So what are we then?" But it was something that had to do with something like white people are something, something, something. Okay? Or I can't remember. And that he yelled back, "So what are we then?" And I remember that opening performance, there were 42 people in the audience. And you got different kinds of responses. Other people came in and confronted. Other people walked into the dressing room and cried. The following night, on the second night of that performance, there were 70 people in the audience. By the time we hit Friday, we were playing to full houses because people were talking about it. After the space closed down in 1979, I didn't go to the new space. I left to go to America. But when I came back in the 80s, theater had changed completely. And I couldn't fit in.
How had it changed the way you couldn't find that space again then? What had happened in that time?
There was too much anger. I think the art had gone out of the theater, the art. There was just a lot of anger. Of course, I'm not going to say everything was like that. I mean, I saw Bongini Ngema's Asina Mali, which means we have no money, which was about the rent boycotts in the Vaal Triangle. Because we lived in these houses. We moved into this house, I think, in 1930. But we were paying rent. And people were saying, but how long are we going to pay rent for these houses? The material that they built the houses with has been paid for. Everything has been paid for, And it's not, even good material for that matter. And so the anger came out. And then people were not paying rent. And I went to see Asina Mali. I mean, the story itself was punchy. But it also involves the people who work for the other side, who take the news from the black side to the law, how they dealt with sellouts. Like, this person was taken out of his house, they put a tire around his neck, and they filled the tire with petrol, and they burnt him to death while dancing around him. Then, excuse me, his family buried him, but the people had not had enough. They went back and exhumed his body and threw it in the garden. I didn't have a story to tell. Somebody came and made me tell his story.
Okay.
Rob Amato arrived at the Space Theatre, and he was an academic who loved theatre. He had a group, a black group in East London, where he came from, called Imita Players. Imita are the rays of the sun in Xhosa. And his dad moved to Cape Town. He was in the textile business, and he bought a factory in Elsis. And so the whole family moved to Cape Town. And he had heard of the space, obviously. And that was his first port of call. And he wanted to put plays up there, you know, all kinds of things. But then he ended up getting a role in a play called Female Transport. And as a stage manager, my exercise book where I wrote my poems was in a locker in the dressing room. And in the play, he had a long period of stage. So I think he just went looking into the lockers and he found the exercise book, read my poems, put it back, and then started asking around, who is this person who's writing poetry? And they all pointed him to me. So Rob tells me that he has been doing research about this king called Kreli. And he has got a lot of stuff about him. And he's been trying over the years to write this story about this king, but he's failing. And suddenly he met me through my poems, and he realized that it's supposed to be written by a Xhosa-speaking person, and I'm that person. And he then said to me, I'd like to show you my research. Now, my two favorite subjects at school were history and English. And of course, history for political reasons, because I was already involved in the black, what do you call it?
Movement.
The black, how can I forget? I'll remember. Steve Biko was the leader of the black, I've forgotten the name now. Yeah, of that movement.
Yeah.
Black consciousness movement. Okay. And what I read in those books and those theses that he gave me to read got me excited. Extremely excited. I had learned how structure works in plays because I was always sitting on the book in the rehearsal room. I was always watching productions every evening, so I was learning on the job. Okay. So when he asked me to do this, I said yes, because first and foremost, I was pulled by the stories. I didn't know that there was a newspaper, that the newspaper called the Daily Dispatch of East London was in existence in the 1800s. And he had found this interview between the king in exile and this white reporter. Those things were very exciting for me. They were not in my school books. They didn't talk about those things. The only things they talked about in our history, in our schools, was how the black people sold the land to the white people for a knife, for a mirror. And to me, that was stupid, you know. How can you sell an entire country to somebody for a knife and a mirror, you know? So when I began to read, my eyes were being opened. I was seeing beyond what I was being told. and what I was being taught in South Africa. And that was the first reason I wanted to do the play. And then he told me that I must resign from the space. And to me, that was very difficult because the space was my umbilical cord. It was like being cut from a mother. And that if I didn't have a play for him in 3 months, he was going to fire me. So I went to Brian, and I told Brian honestly, I said, Brian, I want to try this thing with him. If I don't succeed, will you take me back? And he said, sure, I'll take you back. So I went away, convinced, happy, that if I fail, but I wasn't aiming to fail. So the first thing he did was to drag me to the South African Library at the Gardens. I was afraid to go into that building, I must tell you the honest truth, because all of my life I have been facing rejection. I had white friends who had to go into a restaurant and I would be told very politely that they could not serve me. They could only serve my white friends. It had gotten to a point where if anybody would have told me that I could not go into that library because of the color of my skin, I was going to kill them. That's how angry I was. But he pulled me into that library with so much confidence. While I was waiting for the rejection, he didn't wait for the rejection. He didn't even realize that there would be a rejection. He took me straight to the counter and he said to the guy behind the counter, please, I want her to get a membership card just like that. And the membership card appeared. The power of white people. Amazing, amazing. And he didn't stop there. He took me around the library, taught me what to do and how to do it when I was doing research. And I remember the last thing he said to me is that this is an archive. Books don't leave this place like the library. If there's anything interesting that you find here that you might like, they will make a copy for you. I had read his research. I had to do my own research if I wanted to be part of the project. So I did the white research at the South African Library, going through the history books. But you know something? Kreli was taught as part of our history in school. Most black people knew that story from school. It was the 9th Frontier War, the last of the frontier wars between the Xhosas and the British. For me, the most daunting obstacle about writing this play was not to repeat writing about the Frontier War, because people knew that story. I had to find a different angle into the Frontier War. The king went into self-exile when the war finished. The British say he was defeated, but the history books that I read said it was a freak victory, because the war ended up costing the British at the Cape £1 million in 1873. So really nobody won. The king led an army of 40,000 warriors, and he only came out of that war with 500 men. He went into self-exile in a place called the Hole. So for me, the entrance into the story was the Hole, the place of the king's exile. The play was written in Xhosa. So I had to translate the entire script into English, because I wasn't aware, you see. So Rob told me, sweetie pie, we're not going to do this play for Xhosa-speaking people only. We're going to do it for everybody. So we have to try and write the play in English. And there were obstacles, because there were certain parts of the play that could not be translated into English, like the praise song of the king. So I invented another language called literal translations of Xhosa into English in the play to make, the richness of the language stay. So anyway, word got out that we were going to put this play on at the Space. Rob had brought Julius Ntsaka, who was a senior member of his company in East London. He had found, I think, another actor from Joburg that you knew, I can't remember. But when the auditions began, the whole of Cape Town turned up at our doorstep.
How did that feel to see that?
It was frightening, but it was wonderful. And I was like, I'm new. I don't know what I'm going to do with all these people. How are we going to deal with all these people, And in a sense, I just sat and watched the auditions. I let Julius lead me. I sat and watched the auditions. Because you have to remember, I had no previous experience in theater in that way. And so I was learning from all these people around me. Julius was my teacher. Rob was my teacher. Everybody was teaching me. There was a need. There was a need. And when we had cast that group of 16 people, including myself, became one. We had one ambition: to stay together and make this production a success. And everybody was working to help make the production a success. When we needed traditional Xhosa music, there were people in the cast who just offered us songs that they knew, Xhosa songs. We did all kinds of things. And eventually, when I saw that play on stage for the first time, I was sitting up in the lighting box. And I was listening and I was watching. And I kept asking myself, did I create that? Did I really create that? Because at that point it was just too majestic. Too, I don't know the word. Majestic is the right word. I couldn't believe it, but it was there. Can you imagine being given the freedom to speak to an audience of white people, colored people, black people, but mostly white people, and vent your feelings? Can you imagine that? You have no idea. That's what the Space offered us. Not the ability to stand and swear and be rude, but the ability to get to the essence of being a black person, an African, an original person of this country, and being oppressed by people coming from outside. By people who didn't have the decency to even learn to speak your language, but you had to speak theirs. For people who didn't have even the decency to understand my culture, but I had to understand their culture. Just to talk about those truths. Even if they hurt, if they will hurt me, they will hurt them, but it was a space where human beings met to talk about being human. There is that need for human beings to connect. because the thing that separates us is skin deep, just skin deep. If you peel off my skin, I'll be as pink as you are, as pink as you will be when you peel off your skin. Do you understand? So the space gave us the safety, even if it wasn't safe, you know, because we were really taunting the law and using a very simple system, the Space Club, which some brilliant person found to be the loop to get black people into the space. Well, when Sacrifice of Kreli finally opened at the Market Theatre as the second production in the main theatre, directed by Barney Simon, our dreams had come true. We felt we had made it. I mean, most of us were very wet behind the ears. That cast, that whole cast, most of us were very wet behind the ears. I mean, I remember at the Market Theatre every evening, Marasad was in rehearsal. And every evening when we finished rehearsing Kreli, we'd go upstairs on the balcony of the main theatre and look down at Barney Simon directing that first play that was to open the Market Theatre. And there were 32 actors on stage. And when you watched, they were all like worms, you know. Not one person was standing still. There was motion. And I remember that last lighting cue at the end. The lights didn't go down. They just went up and up and up, like a flash bulb, you know. And then, pow, lights out. And every evening when we left the Market Theatre to go back to the hotel, there would be complete silence. Then someone would say softly in the van, and we have to follow that act. Because Barney Simon had the cream of South African theatre in Marasad. The cream. But little did we know what he was going to do with us when he had us now directing the Sacrifice of Kreli, which was completely another something else. I mean, I was also sitting in the lighting box again, watching. And at the end of the play, the entire audience at the Market Theatre stood up. And there was a standing ovation that went on and on and on. And they were all shouting, "Author, author, author, author." And my stage manager said, "So this is your moment, Goat." And I said, "No, this is not my moment. This is the actor's moment." Of course, amazing. We were heroes everywhere. We were heroes. I mean, even today, there are still people in Langa who don't greet me by my name. They just meet me and say, Sacrifice of Kreli. You know, the classic now, you know, things like that. You know, that's the impact the play had on the people, which is the most important thing. But for me personally, I was getting more and more deeply involved in the Black consciousness movement. And I was looking for my second play. And of course, the first South African became my second play. Okay, there was a young guy who was, I don't know whether he was born here in Langa, but he grew up in Langa. Mother used to tell me the story of how when they saw this white kid in the schoolyard, because she was the maid to the superintendent of Langa. So he sent her to go and remove the young boy from the schoolyard, because if you've noticed along the main road, there are these big houses. That is where all the people who were working for the city of Cape Town to run Langa. So that's where all the white families lived. You see? Yeah. So I remember my last memory of him before he went mad No, when he was already mad. I think he was schizophrenic, I don't know, but he was mad. And he used to come to Langa after they'd kicked him out of the township because he was colored. And he was living in a colored township, but he always came back to Langa. And he was like the Pied Piper. And we would all follow behind him, you know, saying, Jaiva Mapulana, dance Mapulana, Kwela Mapulana. And he would just start dancing. And the whole township, the kids would just follow him. But when he went mad, he would just stand at the corner. You know where the circle is? There's a big house with a broken wall. He would just stand there. And somehow in my heart, and that's like 1962, the last time I saw him, in my heart he always looked like a king who had lost his kingdom. And he came into the township illegally by force against the law. And he would just stand there and look at the township. He went to school with people here. He knows everybody here. And suddenly he gets kicked out because of the color of his skin. The joke of this whole thing of skin color. What do you call him? You know, he's white physically. Okay, he's classified as a colored because his mom is black, his dad is white. But at heart, in his blood, he's an African. He grew up in an African township. Everybody that he relates to is black. So what do you call him? That's why I call the play the first South African. Because to me, he encompasses all the races. Some of my cast members from the Sacrifice of Kreli stayed on. Others went to Johannesburg. There was an opportunity to work in a musical by Victor Ntoni, who is also a Langa-born artist. And so they left. And some of the guys that were in Kreli stayed behind. But there were few. So we had to re-audition. Of course, I must tell you the honest fact that I felt betrayed. As a young writer, as a young person, I didn't know that people would come and go in my life, you know, that people would follow their dreams, that wouldn't stay together forever. And it's Brian, actually, who consoled me. He said, these things happen, people move on. And so we auditioned. New people came into my life, which was beautiful. But then we received a letter from the government, and the play wasn't banned. They did something more cruel than banning the play. They chopped out sections of the play that the government didn't want. And when I sat down with a script and I took those pages out, there was no play. I cried. Brian came to me again, consoled me. Brian told me, you speak Xhosa. And those people who were sitting in the audience that night, who worked for the government, who went back and gave this report about your play that made them decide to chop everything, do not speak Xhosa. You change everything, that those pages that they have banned in your play, and you write them back in Xhosa. And nothing ever happened. The space was lovely. You could arrange audiences anyhow. So if there was a white person sitting here, there would be a black person, a white person. Because if they wanted to ask what are they saying, the black person would tell them. Okay. I don't think the space would have had an arc. Look at the market. I mean, the market was created from the space as a model, you know what I mean? And it has continued, okay? You see, the space was a pioneer in theater in that sense, because it wasn't specifically saying we are doing South African plays and that's it. The space was doing plays from all over the world. The space opened its doors to anybody who walked in through that door and said, Brian, I have an idea. It was the only place, and it still will be the only place, that would say to an artist, you have an idea? We have a gym upstairs. Go into the gym and experiment, and we'll see you after 3 weeks. It affected you. It took you with you. You wanted to be part of that energy. You wanted to be part of that, God, creativeness. And you know what was nice? It wasn't like other theaters. We had to do everything, you see. That was a nice part. When a new play comes, we had to go and build that set, okay? We would pull the set of the old play down on Saturday night, okay? Work right through the night, okay? Pulling that play down. Sunday morning, we come back. We put the new set on stage, okay? Monday morning, the guys who paint will do the painting on that set. We go home, we get a bit of a rest, okay? I was a playwright. I was a resident playwright at this Space Theatre, but I was an usher. So there wasn't really that hierarchy that you find in theaters, normally, where this one does that, that one. That was one of the things that made the space special. We were working to make that space work. You see, my being at the space first came from helping with the fundraising in Constantia, where I did those poems. Then I was asked to come into the family and be part of the family. And in the beginning, they didn't really have a niche for me. So I was the person who would go and buy the cakes for the coffee shop at interval, do all the menial jobs, until Brian realized that they can't keep me there permanently. They had to make me do something else. And that's when I was made into an assistant stage manager. But of course, when Rob arrived and made me and brought the playwright out of me, then Brian's problem was solved. I was there as a playwright. But then Peter Dike Ace was the resident playwright before me. So when he left, so Brian offered that position to me. But it didn't mean anything, really. It didn't change anything. There wasn't an office. There wasn't a special salary increase, that kind of thing. It was a title. It was nice. It was fine. But I was just happy to be in that working energy of the space where when we finish rehearsals, we can go home, When we finish the production, what are you going to do? Okay, I'll come and work as an usher. Do you want me to come and do work in the office, answer the phone, sell tickets? It was family. It's as simple as that. It's like a family business. Do you have an idea of the energy that erupted? Because we put Sacrifice of Kreli on stage a month after the Soweto uprising. So you can imagine the energy. You can imagine the amount of writing that was going on. And the Market Theatre and the Space Theatre were constantly swapping productions. So we were seeing what the black actors and writers were doing in Joburg. And we were importing things from Cape Town to Joburg. Honestly, I didn't even realize that the space was in financial trouble at all. Because there was so much going on in the country. So much going on for us to capture and put on stage that there was no time really to think about finance. Space was creating all the stuff that people wanted to see. The exciting theatre, We didn't notice that because 76, 77, 78, 79, to us, the black people who had been given access of that space, were so exciting. We didn't stop. And when he told us that he was closing down, it came as a blow and a surprise. We didn't even realize that there was no money. I thought he was tired. Until the full reality hit us. money. It's still the same now. Do you know, because some of the black actors lived on the premises, because it was the old YWCA, I think.
YMCA.
YMCA. So there were rooms upstairs. So some of the actors, the black actors, lived there. And you can imagine, you came at any time of the day, you could go upstairs and hang out in someone's room. You know what I mean? So to the people in the townships, there was a relationship to the space in that sense. You can go there anytime you want. I mean, there's no security guard who's going to stop you, you know, that kind of thing. It was so welcoming and so open to people. And people would actually hire a combi to come from the township to the city to see what was going on at the space. So you can imagine that energy where people felt welcome. It's not like me trying to walk into the South African Library and already the first thing that comes to my mind is the rejection. There wasn't that. And so you can imagine the numbers, people bringing other people into this new place where we're all welcome, where we all sit together as South Africans and we watch the best theatre in the country. The swapping of ideas. I mean, do you know the impact Sizwe Banzi's death had on me when I first saw that production at the Space Theatre? When Winston Chona walked on stage and he had not said a word, but his body language had said 1,000 words. Okay? And these guys didn't go to drama school. That was the part. They did not go. Nobody stood there and taught them. They were self-taught. You went to see black people on stage being great. And you want to be like them. Can you imagine seeing someone like Yvonne Bryceland on stage? Yvonne Bryceland could be anything she wanted to be. She could kick her shoes off and be a colored bergie on stage and do it properly. Yvonne had an ass like a black woman. That was unbelievable. But when Yvonne walked on that stage, watch her. It wasn't just the black actors. It was seeing people at their craft being the best. And you sitting there and you are completely in awe. And you come back to Langa and you tell your friends about this place where I'm working now. And everybody wants to come and see what you've seen. The 11th of August, 1976, we were still working on the Sacrifice of Kreli. I was going to work and I was just finishing eating muesli when I heard music somewhere here in the air. At this time of the day, can you hear how quiet it is? Everybody's at school, everybody's at work. So the first reaction was, but the kids are in school, everybody's at work. Who could it be? So I go and stand outside and I see nothing on my street. So I ran to the corner at the main street and I saw these kids from Langa High School marching in fours, in full school uniform, and at certain, how can I put it? There would be a banner, okay, that they were carrying. And then maybe 30 students down the line, there would be another banner. And as you listened to the music, as they were coming closer, you saw these white banners. And just a very simple message. We do not want to be taught in the language of the oppressor. Nothing else, no stone throwing, just this powerful music. And these kids marching orderly down Washington Street. And then when they got around here where the circle is, the law arrived and changed everything. They were taking photographs of these kids marching. They were taking photographs of the banners. And after that, then somebody would jump out of the police van, grab one kid, throw them in. Another person would jump out from another van, grab a kid, throw them in. By the time they got to Langa police station, the march had been disrupted. And so the kids walked across the road to the field next to the church, and they had a discussion. And slowly the community, the people who were here at that time of the day, gathered on the sidewalk. They went back to the police station, and when the police saw them coming, they locked the gates. And so the kids asked permission to be let in, and the policeman told them that, what do you want? And the kids said, we just want to know why our colleagues were arrested. And after you've told us why they were arrested, what crime did they commit? Then book them and release them and give them a date to come to court. And the police got angry. Out came the tear gas, and the kids dispersed. There was one particular boy in that group, young boy, about 15, 16 years old. He went straight to the black policeman who was standing inside the yard. I don't know what he said to him, but whatever he said to the black policeman made him mad, because he came out of the yard and chased this boy. He grabbed him by his school blazer, and the boy just shrugged himself out of his school blazer, and the policeman was left holding the school blazer. We laughed. It was a joke. He went back inside, closed the gates. The kids once more went into the field next to the church, gathered, and this time they all took out white handkerchiefs and they went back to the gate. If you will not allow us to talk to you about our fellow students who have been arrested, would you allow us to speak to the station commandant at least? Again. Tear gas. They dispersed. That same boy went back to the black policeman. I don't know what he said to him, because I was standing on the other side of the street on the pavement. Again, he got mad, chased him, grabbed him by his white shirt. He shrugged himself out of the white shirt. We laughed. The policeman went back behind, closed the gate. When the boy came to him for the third time, he pulled out his service gun and shot him to the back of the head while he was running. I watched his head flying in all directions, and he was still running. But when he got to the pavement, he just put his foot on the pavement and was about to cross when he died. Bam! On the street. There was pin drop silence. Then the teachers ran to him, and somebody from behind the fence at the police station spoke on a hailer thing, loudspeaker. Don't touch him. He is arrested. He is the property of the state. And immediately there were 8 submachine guns going. And then the crowd lost it. People were throwing stones. People were yelling. It was crazy. I walked away. I was so angry. The tears that I was crying were evaporating the moment they came out of my eyes. And there was a thought in my mind, what hope do we have when we have stones against their guns? Or else I would have started throwing stones myself. You see, the tragedy that is South Africa is that it demonizes everybody. It demonizes relationships. And the relationship in the story is the maid's daughter and the master's daughter. People who grew up together, who didn't see each other's skin color, who were family, okay? Until that day when the struggle arrived in Cape Town. And the master thought, I must go and get Linda out of that place. And that was the master's mistake. How does Pumla tell Linda that your dad was murdered by my people when he was coming to take me out of that violence? Okay. It's what happens in South Africa. They lock heads now. They begin to see the skin color, something that was not there before. Because at the end, there was no mom, there was no dad on either side. There was just the two of them in the country in conflict. And they realized that they needed one another. And it's this generation that's influencing the future of these two kids. I work, as I was talking to Brian earlier on, one of the projects that I'm doing at the moment is the Black Writers Forum. And I'm being the door for young people in the townships to access that possibility of being able to write for the professional stage. It takes me 2 years to work with a young black writer because he's like me. He comes out of nowhere with nothing, just the feeling that I want to write, or maybe he's worked in a community theater group, so there isn't much knowledge about writing. So I have to sit with that person for a year. Can you imagine if every black actor or actress or writer could, at the end of the day, in this community, help one child, just one child, maybe to become an actress like those two ladies that you're talking to on the street? If all of us now, okay, who started 40 years ago in the performing arts, as I have, we're at a place where we can give back to our communities. Can you imagine if we took all the professionals in this community and said, you are responsible for making sure that one child in the community becomes an actor professionally, becomes a writer professionally, that we would have a community that is filled with performers and writers. Something that today is not available because our government has decided to take all the arts out of schools. If there is a school that is doing arts, the arts, it's a school, it's a white school somewhere out there in Belleville, or it's a private school that has all the facilities. So if we could take that on, we would change this community. My role, I see myself as a door. The same role that I played at the space, where I was able to bring a lot of black people to a space that would have been completely white otherwise, if I had not been there at the beginning. My role is to allow as many black youth who come to me, who want to be writers, to be given that opportunity to become writers, to be put on the professional stage like I've done with these two guys over here. Because the first play that I worked on in 2007, unfortunately, I had not met the publisher, but now I work with this publisher. So everything that comes out of the Black Writers Forum is published by him. It gives these young writers so much confidence to be able to say, this is my work. It gives you the world. Theater gives you the world. You travel the world through the work you do, because you're not going to be doing South African work all the time. You'll be doing work written by Americans, by all countries around the world. And if you're lucky enough, you will get the opportunity to go to those places and perform there. If not, it's beautiful, because you know what? You are learning about mankind, how mankind can be and how mankind is. You are going to be involved in the different politics of the different writers from different countries around the world. You're going to learn. It's a learning process. And for me personally, it's something that I don't see myself retiring. I want to die working. That's my wish.